Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast. I'm Dr. Taves, joined by my co-host, Dr. Stoerzbach. Glad to have you here. And today we're going to talk about caffeine and its impact on headaches and migraines. And we're going to get into kind of some cool stuff of how our digestive system processes caffeine and why that is something that, as a headache or migraine sufferer, it might be helpful information for you. And then we'll talk about if caffeine is something you should consume or not consume, or maybe just keep doing what you're doing. And this is something that a lot of people, I believe, have questions about. It's not necessarily that they're asking us, but if we understand, a common Google search, I would imagine it's, does caffeine cause headaches? Does caffeine help with headaches? How does caffeine interact with headaches or migraines? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's start off with just kind of what we see in the clinic, as far as like patients and maybe anecdotally what we've seen maybe helps or hurts, that type of thing.
Yeah, so this is a fairly common question, and definitely, I think I looked up at least 80% of people in the world consume caffeine. So it's just kind of a common daily thing a lot of people do. And people with headaches always kind of have the question like, is this hurting me? Is it helping? And what we see in the clinic is, it varies quite a bit. We have some people that seem very dependent on caffeine, where they consume to a level that if they miss any type of caffeine, they really can have almost a withdrawal type headache. And then we have some people that hardly ever, have caffeine and do feel like it's really effective if they're having a bad headache or migraine, that if they take some coffee with a medication, it could be more effective. So we kind of see it across the board.
Yeah. I can think of a few patients off the top of my head that when they came to the clinic, they were very dependent on caffeine. And that could even be like the monster drinks that have high levels of caffeine. Coffee is probably the more commonly consumed sort of mode of caffeine. But I can think of a few patients that the caffeine was kind of keeping them going. Now, they still experienced neck tension, headaches, migraines frequently, but they were using caffeine to mitigate their symptoms, and they would wake up and have 1 or 2 cups of coffee and then just kind of consume coffee throughout the day to keep their migraines at bay. And if they missed a cup, or if they missed like an afternoon or didn't have access to it, it almost always led to a worsening of their symptoms. And so that's a little bit unique. We don't see that all the time, but a lot of the patients that we work with have some sort of interaction with caffeine that they're trying to manage. So let's start off with talking about kind of the how caffeine is processed in the body and how it affects the body, sort of what happens when we consume caffeine.
Yeah, so caffeine is interesting because it is so similar to this thing we naturally have in our brain called adenosine. And adenosine is released right when we wake up, all during our waking hours. It is released throughout the day until by the end of the day, it's kind of what makes us tired and then ready for bed. And then the only way we absorb the adenosine or get rid of it is actually you have to be in good sleep. So it's this, lovely cyclical thing we have in our brain. Whereas caffeine will come in, and because it looks so much like it, our brain it'll kind of block out the adenosine, and it'll make us feel more alert because we're not having that slow buildup. And then what can happen though with that is, then the caffeine kind of comes out of our system, and then sometimes you can feel a crash depending on how much caffeine you've had. So it is considered a stimulant also because it helps vasodilate arteries a bit and capillaries, so we have more blood flow, we can have higher heart rate, even increase alertness. Again, at a certain extent, it can cause heart palpitations, so there's always a moderation to everything. But those are the main effects of caffeine, how it kind of mechanically works in our body. And it's always good to know that when you take it in orally through the mouth, it can take between 30 minutes and 2 hours to kind of reach its maximum plasma concentration or, absorption into your body. And then its half-life, meaning it's kind of coming out of your body within 3 to 5 hours in normal adults that drink caffeine fairly regularly.
Yeah. The other thing to know, we've talked on this podcast that women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience headaches and migraines, and oftentimes the migraines are around the time where you're either breastfeeding or you're pregnant. And so it's important to understand that the caffeine, they tell you not to consume too much caffeine. That's because it crosses the placental barrier. It also crosses the blood-brain barrier. And that's why caffeine is one of those things that's talked about quite a bit and has such an impact on us, is because it kind of slips through these barriers and has an impact on like our brain, and then also on the child. And the child will have a sort of a lower tolerance for caffeine, and so that's why, that's just kind of a little side note. That's why it's considered when you're pregnant or even breastfeeding, because that can transfer to the child that way. And that's on my mind because we had a baby on Tuesday.
Woohoo!
Yeah, it's really exciting.
His name is Teddy.
Yeah, Theodore. We call him Teddy. Yeah, and that's awesome. We're super thrilled. But a little sidebar for the pregnant or nursing moms out there, and what we might actually, I've been meaning to do a little video with my wife on how to breastfeed without causing tension and stuff like that.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I love that.
So if you're listening to this and you don't follow us on Instagram or on TikTok or Facebook, then please do that, because we put out a lot of valuable content through those mediums. All right. So let's move on to...
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
Interrupt. So the big thing I want to talk about too is gastric motility.
Right. Its
effects on that. Is that where you're going next? I might have interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Let's talk about it.
So yeah, like we said, it's a little bit of a stimulant, so it will increase your gastric motility, meaning just how fast your stomach's going to absorb and move things through your gut and your intestines. It's interesting because the research shows the effect of just one caffeinated coffee is similar to eating a meal. It's 60% stronger than just water on your system and 23% stronger than decaf coffee. And to me, that has a huge implication for people with headaches and migraines, because we know that they have decreased gastric mobility, that their stomachs like to slow down, especially when that headache is ramping up closer to a migraine. And so caffeine will improve this and help the absorption of medications and potentially help their effectiveness. So that is huge for headaches and migraines.
Yeah. And that is... Right, that's the implication for someone with headaches and migraines, is that gastric motility, the sort of the speed at which our digestive system is functioning. It'll slow down, and that's what makes these medications, these pain meds, more effective. And so when we look at pain medication and options, the biggest, the most obvious area that this is sort of implemented is with Excedrin. But is there an element, I guess, people might be able to consume coffee while taking a pain med and see benefits that way.
Absolutely.
But Excedrin kind of, they infused it with, 200 milligrams?
I believe it's 130.
Oh, 130. Okay.
Yeah, 130. And obviously with the Excedrin, it's nice because all the timing is there. They've packaged it nicely for your body to take it in. Whereas if you drink a cup of coffee, you might have to time it a little differently than when you're with your meds. Because like we just talked about, it can take half an hour to up to 2 hours to really reach its maximum concentration. So Excedrin, not that coffee and Advil together is horrible, but Excedrin might be a better option.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, just so you guys are aware, we are not pro-medication. We're just explaining why Excedrin and caffeine may be allowing you to see sort of a greater potency or impact with these meds. So we found a few studies on caffeine and its impact and its role with headaches and migraines. Let's kind of pick through those a little bit. This first one, it says the ambiguous role of caffeine in migraine headache from trigger to treatment. So what did they discover?
So This was just like a review of all the current literature, and they kind of said there was insufficient evidence to recommend caffeine cessation or stopping caffeine for all migraine patients, but it should be highlighted that caffeine overuse, like we talked about kind of in the beginning, that overuse dependency can lead to migraine chronification, or like increasing that chronicity or daily headache. And again, sudden caffeine withdrawal may trigger a migraine attack. And they should just be really aware of the amount, the actual milligrams that they're consuming every day, and not to ever exceed 200 milligrams daily. If they want to continue drinking caffeinated beverages, they should try to keep their intake as consistent as possible to avoid this withdrawal headache. So that was kind of the main point of that article.
Yeah, and that is one of the biggest take-homes that I talk to my patients about all the time, is if you are consuming caffeine, let's say you have a cup of coffee every morning, that cup of coffee, your body's sort of used to that, so you don't necessarily need to like increase or decrease. I mean, you can play with that, and you know, stopping the daily coffee might help, but for the most part, what this study is saying is you should just keep a regular intake. Whatever you were doing, continue to do that. So if you don't drink coffee, I'm not recommending you start drinking coffee. And then if you drink, 2 or 3 cups a day, I would say, try to sort of back off a little bit, see how that goes, because the 200 milligram threshold, you're probably crossing that. But if you can get to, 1, maybe 2 cups of coffee, and that seems to be okay, then don't necessarily stop or look to increase, because your body is okay with that. It's not necessarily that caffeine is helping or hurting dramatically, but you might see sort of a withdrawal effect if you stop, or a negative effect if you have too much. All right, so then we had a second study. This one's titled Caffeine in the Management of Patients with Headache. And what did we discover with this one?
Yeah, this was a 2017 study. This one was kind of nice because it was a little more specific to like tension type headaches and migraines, and even the difference of caffeine potentially on the 2 types. And it kind of said, compared with analgesic medicine, so basically Tylenol and Advil, combinations of caffeine with medicine showed significantly improved efficacy in the treatment of patients with tension type headache or migraine. And there was some side effects. So the most common adverse side effects were nervousness, that was in about 6.5% of people, nausea, 4.3%, abdominal pain or discomfort, 4.1%, and dizziness, 3.2%. So pretty low, but that is still very possible to have some of those effects with caffeine. And this review provides evidence for the role of caffeine as an analgesic adjunct, and in the treatment of primary headache. And the main takeaway I would say from this is they noticed in changing the amount of milligrams. So for tension type headaches, and so we've talked about this before, that's more of like the sometimes more both sides of the head, temple pain, kind of stemming really from the neck and shoulders and feeling a lot of this tension, versus migraine a lot of times is more one-sided, a little more acute, maybe behind the eye. That's generalized, but that's kind of how we would think of it. That for tension type headaches, 130 milligrams really of caffeine really enhance the efficacy of the analgesics, or like I said, Tylenol or Advil or ibuprofen, whereas actually just anything over 100 milligrams enhance the benefits for migraine. So fairly close, but there was a little bit of a distinction there.
Yeah, and then let's go into sort of the practical application of if someone's going to try to shoot for that target milligram. What should they know about like tea or coffee? I mean, how much are they consuming? So
the average cup of coffee is 95 milligrams. Now, I'm sure you could do a ton of research on how that's brewed, how long could affect it. But just the average cup of coffee is about 95. You can maybe just round it up like around 100 milligrams. So that's kind of a good thing to know off the top of your head. Now, some people really love tea. Black tea tends to be a little bit higher in caffeine, but it can still range between 30 and 80 milligrams, where green tea is a little lower. That's about maybe 30 to 60. So as far as like coffee and tea, those are kind of some numbers to keep in mind.
Yeah, and then like we said before, Excedrin has about 130 milligrams, and so that's. I mean, we're drinking tea right now because we thought it'd be appropriate to drink tea as we talk about caffeine, and but yeah, I personally have a cup of coffee every morning. I enjoy coffee. I think another element of this, when it comes specifically to coffee, is the added sugar, the Starbucks kind of foo-foo drinks. Sometimes the sugar can have an impact on people. So just know that the way you're consuming caffeine should be considered as well. And there are some added benefits to like consuming tea and coffee, like the antioxidants and things like that, which we won't get into today. But as far as we're sort of continuing on this trend of diet and how diet can have an impact on headaches and migraines, and so that what's kind of the final thought here as far as takeaway? What should people do today?
Yeah, I mean, I just think knowing caffeine it is not a good or bad thing. It's very dependent on the person. I think it's just a good example of everything in moderation can sometimes be helpful. So having that 1 cup of coffee a day at a similar time on a routine around that 100 milligrams is probably, it seems like from the research, would be the kind of the most effective routine for people. So hopefully listening out there, you might be doing that already, and if not, maybe it's something you can try. Again, we're not encouraging you to start caffeine if you're off of it and feel fine. And then the other big thing for headache and migraine people is it does help improve that gastric motility, which is important, and absorbing and decreasing the nauseousness and things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and then caffeine is something that doesn't cause headaches or migraines, and that's another important indication, because a lot of people will put the triggers as the cause, and so this is one of those things that people can sometimes think causes headaches or migraines, but just know that it doesn't. It just has an impact on how you experience pain and the impact on your body and how it interacts with the meds. And so hopefully this podcast gives you a better understanding of caffeine and how that can help or hurt, and if really the takeaway is, if you have a cup of coffee every morning, that's fine, just keep doing it. If you have more than that, consider maybe backing off a little bit, and if you don't drink coffee, then really no need to start, unless you want to play with its effects on the pain meds. And so that's any other final words?
No, I think we covered it.
All right, thank you for listening to the Headache Doctor podcast. As always, it's our mission to empower and educate everyone with headaches and migraines to break free from a life of fear and dependence and thrive in everything you do. Stay tuned next time for some more helpful information for all you out there suffering with headaches and migraines.